Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. And today we have an episode that I've been wanting to record for a long time. We wanted to record something about attachment styles for a long time, because it's something that I see for myself in my own dating life, but also in the men that I work with as being, really important to learn and understand and to work with, and have an awareness of. Because, when we have an awareness of the things that are holding us back, we have an opportunity to move through them, which is incredibly important to do. Otherwise, if we don't have awareness, it's very difficult sometimes to create change in particular areas. So I've got Samuel Shin on the episode this week. We had a wonderful conversation which really weaved and bobbed in between many different things. We talked a lot about attachment styles and dating for men and masculinity and how those things all kind of interweave with one another, because there's definitely an intersection of how as men we're taught to be a certain way, we're taught to be cool and to be detached and stuff like that, which shows up in some of the avoidant tendencies. And then, we replay out these ways of being, even though that might not be our internal feeling. That might not be what we're really feeling, but we do those things because we're trying to play the good part of the cool man or whatever it may be. But we get much deeper into that. Samuel's a really interesting guy. Was a former therapist, so he's really well versed in this stuff in terms of from a very therapeutic background, and has now moved over into men's work facilitation and as a dating coach. So he talks about himself and his journey, which is actually very interesting journey to listen to. But we talk about a lot of things, like I said, gender roles. We talk about masculinity and being anxious, avoidant, and so forth, and this sort of organized avoidant, things like that. And we talked about some practicing techniques to overcome anxiety in your dating life, as well as how the role of our parents and our upbringing plays a role in our development as us being socially confident, but also on our attachment styles as well. We talk about that. So it's a really authentic conversation between two men who just, discussing their own experience, but also giving the knowledge and wisdom of our many years of work. It's therapy and coaching, mind coaching and so forth. So it's a really great episode for you to sink your teeth into. And before we get into that, just to let you know, what I've got coming up in terms of workshops and what else do I run? I run workshops and programs and, that sort of wonderful thing that I love doing and presenting to people. This episode is worth noting as well. I'm going to take a little break from podcasting. When I say a little break, I'm going to take about 3 weeks off. I'm going on various retreats. And I just need, it's easier to take a break. And I want to take a break because it's been almost a year straight. The podcast has been coming out. So take another break like I did at Christmas. So, there's going to be, you can dive into other episodes if you feel a bit bored. There's probably, of the 150 episodes I've released, I'm sure there's a few you haven't listened to that might be worth going back, especially the ones at the beginning. Especially the ones at the beginning with me and Ahmad are very much worth listening to, because it's just the two of us, and we're really getting deep into, our experience of dating and life and emotional expression. And, though it was the earlier episodes, there's a lot of gold in there actually, because we focus, from dating, we focus more on dating in those episodes, more on some of the more tactical aspects of dating as well. Creating connection, starting conversations, getting over heartbreak, all those, expressing emotion, those things are very, we get very deep into those. So if that's something you're interested in, it's very much worth jumping into that. In terms of events I've got coming up, I've got an event I'm running with Orsa. It's called The Foundations of a Conscious Relationship. It's on the 15th of May, and we're really taking singles and couples as an event for singles and couples, how to build the foundations of a conscious relationship. Because we've had a lot of people come and speak to us through Instagram or email relating to the podcast episode we did, number 100, which is me and also recorded together, talking about our relationship and how we built it and also keep it, in a place of love and connection and playfulness and excitement and passion. All things I'm sure you want in your relationships as well. So we talk about how we built that and how we built that before we even met. And that's a really important part why it's also open to singles and couples, is because you have to build this stuff into your life before you meet. So that's on the 15th of May. So Sunday, and the time, this is UK time, it's 5 p.m, which means we've done it in this time because we're getting quite a few people from the US and who want to come. So it means it's midday, and it means it's easy for everyone to come to. So that's one thing we've got coming up. And then the other thing I've got coming up is an 8-week group coaching program for men. Now, this program is going to be just some of my best. I'm really looking forward to this, actually. I feel nervous, like I always do when I create new things, but I'm really looking forward to this because it's going to be about masculinity, relationships, intimacy, confidence, and leadership. Those are going to be the pillars that I'm really talking about. And these are the things that I see in coaching clients again and again. Men I work with are the things that allow them to either stop them from fulfilling what they want in their lives, that's holding them back, the thoughts, the actions, and so forth. Or these are the things that propel them forward. When we start to really look at our relationship to these things, to start to propel them forward. So plus you get all that wonderful information and exercises and embodiment exercises and meditations and all that stuff I'll be doing. You also get the support of other men that are deeply interested in my podcast and the work that I do, and are probably like you, the sort of men that you don't meet as much as you want to, right? And I've already filled about 5 or 6 spots now when I look up on my little wall for this. So, if you're interested, I'm not going to be taking more than probably 12 people. It's going to be the very max I take. I might keep that to 10 just for nice numbers. So if it's something you're interested, please email me, hello@theauthenticman.net, or get me on Instagram @theauthenticman_. But enough about stuff that I've got coming up. Allow you to get into this episode. Welcome, listeners. Back with another episode about a topic that comes up a lot when we talk about dating. Comes up a lot when we talk about relationships, and for very good reason, actually. And that's really how we attach to each other, our attachment styles. This work came through a number of years ago, or probably more than a number of years ago, but come into the kind of popular culture a number of years ago. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the various styles and how they are applicable to men and women, and even how most of our dating advice, a lot of the dating advice now is predicated on the idea of people being in certain attachment styles, or certain genders being in certain attachment styles. So I thought I'd get someone in to have a conversation about that. I'd like to introduce to you dating and relationship coach, Samuel. How are you doing?
Hey, David, listeners. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. It's always nice to get a fellow dating coach on. It's not something I do actually as often as I used to. It's strangely, as my podcast has evolved, I've talked about a lot of other things other than dating, like healing, sexual shame, sex, men's work, and all these things. Even though, as we were talking about before, these things kind of affect dating, but to talk purely about dating, I know it's one of the favorite topics of my listeners, because it's very much the origin of the podcast as well.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, that's a good I like that, because what I want to do is redefine what it means to be a dating coach. It's like, oh, I'm a dating coach, but as we'll talk about, I do so much more. My background in therapy, mental health, and all this conscious sex stuff and stuff too. So it's like, it's not just like dating and picking up women. It's sort of the art of attraction, how to really connect and be in your own sexuality and just become more attractive, confident, and do it in an authentic way, so that the dating will lead to a fulfilling relationship, a genuine relationship, real connection. Like that's kind of the goal of my work. So, but yeah, people can hear dating coach and think, oh, another dating coach, or, this guy who goes to the bars and all this stuff, but that's like, so not who I am. Yeah.
I once had a woman reach out to me on Instagram, probably about a year and a half ago. And she was quite hostile, actually. And with her messaging, and she comments on some of my posts saying how they were dangerous to women and women can be harmed through some of the content I was putting out. And then I kind of spent some time looking at her posts. And what I really saw was this deep mistrust for men. And I always remember one of the posts I saw from her. And her post basically said, whenever I hear a man say that he's a dating coach and he coaches men, I instantly become suspicious, because I know really he's just toxic and he's teaching other men to be toxic. Mm-hmm. And it really hit me at that moment, like, wow, there's this idea and story, we'll call it a story or a narrative, that just because as men we're teaching other men about dating, that we must be teaching them something toxic. And that, I'm not saying everyone believes this narrative, but this particular person had an extremely large following, to say the least. And that was the general rhetoric. But actually, there's a lot of really authentic, open-hearted dating coaches that I've met in the last few years who are doing their best to help men be that way, to show up in a more open-hearted, more connected way, to connect to themselves, their feelings, their leadership. And a lot of those coaches, what they do is unfortunately tarnished with a lot of the ideas of the past. People like Neil Strauss and a lot of the work that he will call pioneered in many ways, has kind of been a lasting legacy of the phrase dating coach.
So that's what you were doing before, like you started off like in the dating coaching world.
Yeah. So if I go back like 12, 13 years, like many men, I picked up the game and I read that, and it probably gave me the confidence actually to just go out and do more. And I found myself working for a company in London who, had a lot of fun with some amazing guys doing that. And I was going into clubs and bars, and I wouldn't say it was, using all the lines and all the magic tricks and stuff like that and the funky like clothes and hats, but I knew guys that did that. I knew guys that did all that stuff. It wasn't really my style because I couldn't remember everything, and I kind of like to dress how I like to dress. But it was I always say it was amazing in so many ways, because it was the first time I'd been anywhere where men were coming together to help, not just help each other, but to learn and become better men. And a lot of the men I worked with at the time were amazing guys. And some of them I'm still in contact with now, and like really loving, kind men who, just struggled with confidence and so forth. So I have many good memories, and I have some bad memories from that time, from some of the things that I experienced with people. But for the most part, I see it as very positive. It's, one of the first male self-improvement
men's work,
essentially. It was a type of men's work. Like, how can I relate better? It's had those elements of like, how can I be more confident? How can I communicate better and all these things? How can I have more fun? Like, how can I be less nervous? So it was a lot of positivity I saw in that.
Right. Yeah. Being the best version of yourself. It's interesting because a lot of dating coach or pickup artists, dating coaches end up just becoming self-development people, right? They're like, this is actually what I really needed or really wanted, right? What's most fulfilling. Like you see that a lot, I think, with Neil Strauss too. Interesting. Well, that's cool.
And how about yourself? What was your journey to do this work? 'Cause I know you were formerly a therapist.
Like, how did I become a dating coach or a dating relationship coach? Yeah. Well, I guess there's like two parts of it. There's like, the professional side, and like there's just my life story, right? So I don't know I'll try to weave those together somewhat succinctly, but I was one of those weird people that just knew what I wanted to do. Like I was so passionate about psychology from my first time taking it in high school. Um, and like I was like, whoa, this is different. Like they talk about the unconscious and like the iceberg with Freud, and it was a terrible psychology class. It was taught by my tennis coach, but I just remember I liked it and it was different. I wasn't really into school and stuff. I was doing a lot of drugs and I just wasn't really present, but that class stuck with me. And so then in college, I majored in psychology. I was interested in, you know, idea of dream. I was just passionate about it. I was really interested in it. It was the only thing that I was interested in. And kind of went through this crazy period in college where life-changing things happened. And I just dove way deeper into psychology after that. And so studying, really wanting to know more about who I was, who people are, like the truth of who we are, consciousness, studied neuroscience. And I wanted to become a psychologist, get my PhD in psychology. But it's heavily research-based. So I was like, you know what? I heard about this other master's program that's like humanistic, that's like kind of the roots of psychology. There's some Buddhism stuff too. Like, I'm just going to go check that out, like learn that side of counseling and being a psychologist and working with people, the human element, and then I'll go get my PhD. So I went to that school for my master's, and it changed my life. It was like, I had up until that point just been this like guy who was unaware of his emotions, dissociating. A lot of drugs. I was very philosophical and, interested in knowledge and stuff, but just kind of not embodied, and a lot of pain and stuff from my family. But just dissociated. And I went to that school. I had no background in spirituality or anything, but this school was like basically like a workshop. It's like it's like, when you go to a workshop, like it was kind of like that, because you go through this portal with people, a cohort, and you transform together, you heal together, and you learn theory together, and you practice with each other. So it was a therapy school that was really experiential, but I had no experience in that. And so I was pretty, it was intense for me, but that's really what changed the direction of my life. I didn't go for the PhD program. I was like, this is enough. Like I started to just understand who I was and get in touch with who I was. And then at that school, there was also my second semester, a class called Holistic Sexuality. And one of my classmates first semester was like, oh, you might want to take this class, because I was talking about the heart or something. And he was like, this is a great class. And so I was like, oh, cool. I just took his recommendation and took it. And the class ended up being, it was like this woman from Spain, from Barcelona, who had developed this work where you explore your sexuality, but not just sexuality as like sex, but like sexuality as life energy, and like life and creativity and potential, as well as like, how does that dance with the spiritual and who we are as conscious beings, and and how does that come together in the heart? So those were kind of the three basic elements of it: the heart, our identity, and then consciousness, spirituality, the mind, and then like sexuality and, vitality and creativity. And it wasn't tantra, but it was just kind of this human, how do we be human together? And what does it mean to be human? So we dove into that, and it was through embodied meditations. So second semester at this school, I'm like putting my hands on people's lower bellies, because we didn't want to touch the genitals at the school. I ended up doing workshops with them later and touching people's genitals, but like, it was just a very safe, structured, like intentional practice. And we did that in these workshops. And that really catalyzed a huge like awakening for me. I'd grown up Christian, very fundamentalist, kind of like, shame around, like so much shame around sex. But that class really helped me open up to sex in a way that wasn't just like, I feel more open to it, but it's essential to who I am as a human being. It's a powerful way to connect with myself and be myself and open up to energy. Like I had some huge opening up of energy in that class. And I ended up doing more workshops with them, and close off, this type of thing, but very safe, not sexual, right? Not like trying to turn people on. I mean, you get turned on, but like just focusing on yourself and what comes up for you. And so after that class, I started to have some pretty intense, just things started to shift, I guess I'll say, in my life personally, and then also with dating and women, and I'll share it. I started to have like orgasms without, any sort of, like I'd just be driving in my car, or like sitting in the parking lot at a grocery store, or just on the computer at my house. And then all of a sudden these like huge, intense, like internal orgasms were just like surging through my body after that class. And then that happened for about a year. And that was just embodying sexual energy. That was just learning how to embody my own energy, and especially sexual energy. But it really translated into these powerful experiences with women sexually, intimacy, spirituality too was really healing. And I would meet more women. I don't know if this was because of that work or just who I am, but like, I would just have lots of encounters with women. And, I hadn't learned any pickup, but it was like dating was so easy for me because I knew how to connect, not just not sexual stuff, but just like emotionally too. So just connecting with women, it was just easy the goal wasn't always just to have sex, but like sex was easier because of who I was and how I was able to connect with them. And so, fast forward, I was a therapist, all this stuff at the same time. I was deep in that world, but I decided to become a dating coach because I was like, oh, wow, like, I wonder if I can teach this. I wonder if I can help men really embody their sexuality, masculinity too, because I was doing men's work in a way that dating and sex and whatever just becomes easier and more natural, more authentic. And so, because I hadn't learned any pickup. I learned pickup a little bit later from this one person that I liked because I didn't like the other pickup people. But I just, how can dating and sex and all that stuff be done in a genuine way, in an authentic way? And I felt like that's how I had gone about it. And I had all this success, I'm Asian too, right? So there's like this huge rhetoric in the States, like being an Asian man is like the least attract. I was like, I hadn't had any problems with that, and I almost 100% chalk it down to the work that I had done on myself, which is just being human. And women are humans. They if they feel this energy in you, they'll be more attracted to you. Like, but anyways, I bring together a lot of this. I still do therapy in my work. Like a lot of my clients would say I'm still a therapist because I go so deep into attachment, which we'll talk more about. But that's kind of a separate thing. But working on that really helps people feel more like they can be themselves, feel secure in themselves, feel like they can express themselves, not have these hangups around women or feeling insecure, or, all that stuff too. So it's like sexuality, confidence, masculinity with the attachment stuff, with the insecurities. So it's the whole package, in my opinion. I really bring together, I think, what are the most essential elements to help men not just date, but be themselves, find fulfilling relationships, love, all that stuff. So yeah, that's kind of my journey and how I got to doing what I do.
Incredible. it's something I used to say probably quite a lot in the early days of the podcast, is that often as men we are thinking, especially when in the dating journey, we just get into that like, how can I talk to my woman, how can I have to say the right things? But actually a lot of the work, and it sounds like this is the work that you did, was to become a lot more comfortable with sex and our sexual selves, because ultimately the driver we're experiencing to date and to have relationships is a driver towards sex. So if we are uncomfortable with sex and our sexual selves and interacting with someone else's sexual self, these thoughts, those worries will get in the way of us even doing the first thing, which is just having a conversation.
Right. Yeah, approaching with that type of energy, right? Like, because that is that's essential in dating. Like, you have to have sex. Like, that's the point, not just dating, but like like that's, if that's not there, if that's a missing ingredient, then you're not going to be successful in dating, right? So, but it's sort of assumed that men are good at sex, or that men are open to sex, or they're sexual because they're men. But yeah, a lot of men aren't as sexual as people think, or not as comfortable with it, right? They are sexual. They're super sexual, and they can be more confident, but they're not taught it, or maybe there's trauma, or there's like insecurity, or so it's blocked. And yeah, those are the men who struggle with dating.
Yeah. And as we were saying before we started, it's like that blockedness kind of comes out in maybe a couple of different ways. Like there's the men who struggle to be sexual in their dating lives. Like they're very timid, maybe they're very afraid, they lack confidence and self-esteem. And I actually think the other side, not necessarily, there's more of a polarity than this. The other side, the men who are overtly sexual, right, probably are often suffering from the same sexual block, and they mask it by just doing the things that they think they should be doing. The kind of the quote unquote kind of toxic masculine behaviors that we see, men being overtly sexual, overtly dominant, but actually they're just using that as a way to mask the inner insecurity with their sexual selves and their own sexuality. Yeah,
I would actually say, because those men typically are good at dating, right? They're good at attracting women, or having sex and all that stuff. They struggle with relationship. They probably struggle with intimacy, commitment, being more vulnerable, open emotionally, communication, all those types of things. So dating is probably fine. They're not going to reach out to a dating coach, but they're going to feel unfulfilled inside. And you do hear this from a lot of people who, you probably saw this, but people who are in the pickup world, like they get really good at having sex and, picking up women, but they struggle with having a fulfilling relationship, or when they start to have feelings for somebody, things kind of get thrown off, and, they start to feel their insecurity that they never really worked on. Maybe that's what you're talking about. But I think it's more of like an emotional insecurity, it's like a heart disconnection from the heart, or not being totally authentic and connected with themselves. Whereas the men on the other end who struggle with dating and sex and all that, they're like, it's more of a sexual block. They're like really open-hearted, or maybe they're not healed, or their trauma is still there, but it's like they lead with the heart a little too much, their emotions, and their sensitivity and being nice and overly like it's almost the opposite. Like their block is sexual, whereas I think the other men, their block is in the heart, like being more open-hearted. So that's that's how I would draw that distinction. But I think what you were talking about, I think I get what you're talking about. It's insecurity in the end, both sides.
Yeah.
We're
all suffering with this insecurity around being men, being trying to be the men we think we need to be, or we've been told that we should be.
Yep. Yeah. I don't talk about this too much anymore, but it's the whole, patriarchy thing, whatever, like that toxic like it affects men too, right? Like it affects women, or, but it definitely creates a division in men. I think on both ends, like the spectrum that you're talking about is created, and this insecurity is created because of these messages that we're told of what it means to be a man. So the men who are like hyper masculine feel like they have to stay that way, and that's going to be the best version of themselves or bring the most fulfillment, and like, you know, but it's hurting them because they don't know how to be vulnerable. They don't know how to have intimacy. They don't know how to connect, and they don't, you know, they have a lot of pent up rage or emotions or pain and shame. And the other side of the spectrum as well, the men who feel blocked or, you know, feel like they're less masculine or not man enough, like they feel like they have to really try to reach for the like hyper masculine, when all they really need to do is like, hey, learn how to be more comfortable with yourself, learn how to heal your trauma, learn how to be more open sexually, like these things that just push you a little bit, you know, instead of trying to be like the stereotype of a man. But that's what they're taught too, and that's what, you know, is the message that they've internalized. So like it creates a real lack in them, right? Feeling like they're not enough too. It's tough, man. It's tough to be a man right now. Tough to be a guy.
It's I think it's tough to be a man, but I think it's maybe one of the first times, and it's probably not the first time in history. I read a book recently called Fire in the Belly, and you know, I think it was written back in the 80s, and it was talking about men questioning masculinity. So it's not the first time in history we've really questioned masculinity, but maybe it's the first time during the questioning of masculinity, there's so many examples of other ways to be a man and to still be a man, you know, and still be a man who's looked up to, who is successful. You know, I always think of, you know, the gold star for me, I often go to is like Will Smith. You know, we grew up watching Will Smith, Fresh Prince, rapper, all these things, and you see the Will Smith now, who's a man who will openly cry, he'll talk about his relationship troubles, his intimacy, you know, all these things, but he's also deeply committed to his relationship and his children and all these things, and he doesn't fit into some of these kind of stereotypical ways of being a man, but yet he still is incredibly successful and a man we can all look up to.
Right. Yeah, that's I mean, it reminds me of the 4 masculine archetypes, right? Or like how to be like a balanced masculine or integrated man. But I also think it applies to dating and relationships, because one of the things I like to teach with men is a lot of men who struggle with dating, it's more just around like boundaries, to be honest. Like they don't know how to have healthy boundaries in their life. They don't know how to establish boundaries or even what boundaries are. They like give up all their boundaries for women, and that tends to be, you know, what makes them unattractive, or you know, it repels attraction actually. And it's a feature of the masculine in a way, I think, boundaries, but it's also just like self-worth. And you don't have to like, man, I just want to talk to all like the pickup guys, you know, all the guys who get them to pick up, and it's like, you don't have to do that. You know, you don't have to like, you can just, develop healthier boundaries, or like start to feel some sense of self-worth, and like, it's okay to be who you are and deal with the insecurities. And you will improve your dating life. Like it will happen, you know? But yeah, that you're talking about attachment. That's like, you talked about attachment styles, but I understand where you're coming from, because that's the attachment that people hear about in the mainstream. But, you know, coming from the therapy world, like attachment is just attachment. It's like this whole body of work that's really how your early childhood experiences formed your relationships later on, your patterns in intimacy, your, you know, confidence, self-esteem, like your ability to regulate your emotions, mental health, like it's all just comes from these early childhood experiences. So when I talk about attachment, that's where I come from. And so, with boundaries, self-esteem, all these things, you know, like they really do come from attachment issues. And so that's why I do this work, is because a lot of men who struggle with dating they have these issues, but they're not even aware of it. Like, why are you unconfident with women? Why are you scared to be yourself with women? Why do you lose your boundaries? Why do you seek validation? Like all that really comes from attachment stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's it is, I come from the way I was being in my dating life was, and I'm sure we'll talk about the different attachment styles, but I was very avoidant. I was quote unquote probably, how I see a lot of dating advice now, and even the stuff in the pickup world it's all predicated on the idea that to be successful in dating, you need to be avoidant. Most dating advice, if you look at the nuances of it all, it's like, oh, you're a guy, you like that girl, play it really cool, seem like you're disinterested, be nice and cool, but play these mixed signal games. Now, when I was dating, when I was definitely in my 20s, I didn't need to play these games because that's just how I was. Intimacy was something that was fearful to me, especially deep intimacy and emotional opening up. So it was like I would back away, which meant that I was also very successful in dating because of all these things. Right. And it wasn't really even me playing games. It was just out of my own fear, really deeply afraid. But I guess it's a good time to ask you, what are the different attachment styles that are out there that we kind of generally agree on that exist?
Yeah, there's some like disparity, or like, is it 3, or there 3 types, 4 types, whatever, and what are they all named? But in general, and I'll just say I'm not an expert in attachment styles, but I we could talk about it a bit. But the 4 would be, so you could break it down to secure and insecure. Secure attachment is secure attachment. And then there's insecure attachment, which can be broken down into anxious, just like anxious ambivalent, or just anxious avoidant. Like they call it different things, but anxious, I call it like anxious ambivalent. And then there's the avoidant, and then there's disorganized. And that's kind of, I would say, the gist, but there's some disparity, like I said, like anxious ambivalent, anxious avoidant, and like different types. So, but yeah, insecure and secure, and insecure attachment has anxious, avoidant, or disorganized.
What are some of the, because we hear these banded around, like that person's anxious, that person's avoidant, I'm disorganized. Like I've definitely heard that from, I'm that unique person who's a mix of the two. I've heard that from so many people. But what are some of the kind of traits that we see in, say, avoidant or anxious, ambivalent and anxious avoidant people?
So what I'll say though is before getting into that is, this is patterns in intimacy. That's kind of how I look at it. Like, how comfortable or uncomfortable are you with intimacy? You can also look at it in terms of like trust versus mistrust, fear of abandonment, that type of stuff. But I really think I chalk it down to like intimacy and connection, like closeness, like what's your response or reaction to that? And then the second thing is, attachment styles can change. So like people saying, oh, I'm this or I'm that. It's like astrology, right? It's like that's kind of how they're looking at it, like an identity thing. But sometimes your attachment style actually just comes from trauma, right? It actually just comes from how your mother, it's mom, because these things form very early, like 0 to 2 years old. And what was your mom's response, or what was her energy like? How safe was she? Like, how attuned, like these types of things will develop early on. And then the child will have a reaction. It's sort of a defense mechanism, I think. Because I think this is my, like, I can be too, like, I don't know if this is true, but this is how I think about things. Like, I have to believe these types of things, that like we all have an authentic self, which is secure. We all can develop secure attachment. We can all develop security and intimacy and trust. Like, because if you don't have that, I have to think that it comes from trauma or some sort of relational wounding, right? But the difficulty with identifying that is that these are very early. These are very early things, like very unconscious, 0 to 2 years old, even maybe before birth, right? Like in utero, like this can just be how safe and connected did you feel to mom, like that type of thing. And if your mom was like a decent person, it's going to be hard to think that like she might be the person to blame for this, but people are humans, like, and it's so dependent on how, I mean, we're getting super deep into this, but how, like, what was your mom's mom like with her when she was a baby, like these things get passed down, and it's really hard to see them. But, everybody I've worked with, I can say that it's like attachment, like these types of things, especially if you have difficulty regulating your emotions, if you're just like, if you have insecurity around, it's very early stuff. But as an adult, how these play out, right? I would say anxious ambivalent is, it tends to be associated with the pursuer, right? So you've probably heard of the pursuer withdrawer. So it's like, those are the people who are fearful of abandonment, and their reaction to that is to like pursue or glom on, right? Become more needy. Whereas the avoidant type is, in the face of intimacy, they still fear abandonment, right? They still fear rejection or loss, but their reaction to it is not to go more forward. Their reaction is to like pull back, right? To like protect themselves from that feeling. And so those two tend to get into a dynamic and into relationships. And typically you're right. Like, the women tend to be the anxious ambivalent, and then the men tend to be the avoidant. But it can get switched around, and but it's just not the norm, right? But yeah, it's just reactions to the fear of abandonment, right? So, and intimacy can bring that up in people. That's I think the thing, the core thing here is that it's just about intimacy and like how comfortable are you, and because intimacy brings up vulnerability and feeling exposed or like sharing yourself. And if you don't feel secure in yourself, you don't feel like you don't have good self-esteem, or like you're just worthy as a human being, you're gonna tend to project abandonment and rejection in the face of and being unworthy of love when there's intimacy, right? And you know what I mean? Like that I think is, and then that creates the attachment pattern, or the it's really a defense mechanism, in my opinion. So yeah, that people tend to think about that in terms of relationships, but it totally plays out in dating too, And I think that's one of the reasons why I like to work on this, is because with men who have trouble dating, their attachment style is more the insecure, anxious, ambivalent. They might have had overbearing mothers or controlling moms, or moms who weren't available, and so they're going to be attracted to more avoidant types of women, or like women who are emotionally unavailable or more toxic, or, masculine, I guess, but, and that doesn't end up being that can work as a relationship, but, they're not going to be seen as attractive to most women who, like the more avoidant guys, or like men who aren't so emotional or needy or, insecure, that type of thing. So, yeah, I know I like threw a lot at you there, but that's that's attachment for me. I think it comes down to the attachment styles, but also this whole idea of like intimacy and connection and even attraction and dating, and how do you feel about the opposite sex? Like what's your reaction as you get closer to intimacy?
So I guess the first experience we have of intimacy is with our mother. It is a form of intimacy. I know we often think of intimacy and we only think of sex, and obviously there's multiple types of intimacy: emotional, physical, sexual, even experiential, conflict intimacy, that sort of thing. And these things are all part of the kind of intimacy package. So it would make complete sense that we would just pour over our experience of being with our mothers into the next, what we could kind of call most important relationship in our adult life. And I guess, from some of what I've read is like, we just reuse that pattern. We're like, okay, so our brain keeps the pattern and then just reuses it in our relationships. And we end up in these dynamics, like you said, of this kind of the old anxious avoidant dynamic, which I think is one of the most, I guess, is probably the most classic one to find ourselves in. And like you said, like my experience with guys is also that men who happen to be more anxious, who may struggle to really communicate what they want, what they need, struggle with self-worth and confidence, they find themselves actually meeting women who are avoidant and who are very almost indifferent to them. And this creates a lot of pain for these guys, because it's just like, well, these are the men who are often, we're often told that don't exist. Men who want to love and want relationships and they want to be open-hearted, right? We're kind of told that these men don't really exist a lot when we see the kind of general dating literature and so forth. But these men exist and they really want love and they really ready and they want it. But how they show up for it makes them often unattractive because of the way in which the kind of the neediness can show up. Always I kind of look at it as like this outsourcing of self-worth. It's like, if you like me, then that means I'm worthy and valuable. And then they go in this pattern of seeking a woman to validate them.
Yep.
In that kind of way. I guess one of the questions I was asked you actually is, I've never checked this, because we always so often talk about men being avoidant, women being anxious. Is there anything to say that there are more women who are anxious and more men who are avoidant?
Say that again.
So in terms of percentages of the people that are avoidant and the percentage of people that are anxious, are there more, there's a high percentage of women who are anxious and a high percentage of men who are avoidant?
I don't know. Actually, I don't know the percentages, but I'm sure that's actually, I don't know if I'm sure it's true, but because there are a lot of men who struggle in dating right now. Like male virginity is on the rise in the past, since I think 2012 or something. Like there was an article in the Washington Post. Yeah, male virginity is 3 times higher than it was like 10 years ago. And so I would assume that those men are the type, typically, I mean, it could just come down to they're not sexually confident, they're not sexually open, they're not in touch with their masculinity. It's like, does masculinity necessarily correspond with avoidant attachment? Like, I don't think so. But again, the conversation about boundaries, right? Like men, like a man who's, you talk about purpose a lot in men's work, or like, this need for independence and autonomy, and so like those types of things can be associated with, I think those can tend to be like avoidant types in a way, but those men can still be like Will Smith you're talking about. They can still be available for emotional connection, for a relationship, for intimacy, they can be good communicators, but those men are, I don't know if there's not a lot of them, but yeah, when you talk about numbers, I'm not sure like the percentages, but I think it's more a like gender norm thing, and man, it's so, it's I can feel my brain like having 2 different like overlapping trains of thought. Like one is the normal heteronormative, like, straight dating kind of thing, like where it's men are like this and women are like this, and this is this is how it, and then there's like this other thing where it's like, roles are changing. Men can be sensitive and emotionally available. Women can be more masculine or whatever, right? But it's such a hard. It's like because I work with men, right? So it's like, what do men need? And so I focus a lot on men who might be more sensitive and yeah, I don't really know where to go with that question, to be honest. But yeah, it's throwing my brain for a loop, and I think in a good way, because it really gets to the heart of, where we are right now as a world, really, maybe not a world, but in the Western culture at least, like where we are with dating, relationships, and how that intersects with gender, right, and sexuality, masculinity, femininity, like it yeah, I never thought about that, but attachment, and this anxious avoidant, and like that's right there. It's like, are men, because basically what you're asking is, are men anxious and ambivalent, and men avoidant, and avoidant attachment? And I don't think so, but I think that's what we're taught is okay, like that's how you're supposed to be. And so that makes the most sense. That's like, we want to, it sort of, what am I trying to say? It's normal. And so since it's more normal and what we're supposed to do, that's kind of how we approach it. That's how a lot of men approach it. That's how a lot of women approach it. But I don't think it has to be that way. And, but it's confusing, because the men who tend to be the needy, seeking validation types are also not very confident in themselves. They're not very sexual. They're not very masculine, which is also important when it comes to dating, because a woman doesn't want a guy unless she's the more masculine, whatever, avoidant, whatever, right? That then she might be open to that type of guy. But I don't know, when it comes, it's not going to be fulfilling. I don't think they're, oh gosh, yeah, I can feel myself going into really difficult territory. So I'm going to stop. This is a very complicated, I love talking about this, but it's hard to land on anything definitive. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because we, what I'm really hearing you say is, like, we're taught in the world, we're taught through dating advice, like very standard dating advice from the PUA movement, but even down to, what was it, the book, The Rules, I think it was, for women around dating and all sorts of things. It really imprinted.
Well, it's also media too. So, sorry to interrupt you, but it's just media, and like it's everything. Like the standard like masculine dude, and like romance movies, and like, I mean, it's changing more now, but yeah, it's, yes, the dating world, but also just like stereotypes and masculinity, and what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. Like those still sort of pervade, even though they're dying away.
The gender roles, and as well, they have this idea that ultimately women are anxious and men are avoidant, and even if we're not, we're taught that that's how we should be. To be a man, you should be avoidant, you should be ultra independent, and to be a woman, you should be looking for a man. A man's going to make your life whole. You're going to make you whole and complete, and you should be searching for those things. And it's only, I guess, in the last probably 40 years that, obviously because of equality, equal rights movements, that women are like, well, I don't really need a man to make my life happy. I can strive for what I want, move up through the corporate ladder, and so forth. So they're not adhering to those roles. And then on the flip side, you've got men who are maybe a bit slower to get out of that role of being maybe avoidant or always striving, because the gender role is so it's so much smaller actually for space for how a man can be. So it's almost like, as when we talk about, it's so hard to remove this kind of gender imprint we've been given from the attachment styles, because the attachment style of people could easily be influenced by the imprint, the social and cultural imprint that's kind of told of how we should be, and will play out in our dating lives.
Totally.
So it's a very difficult thing to kind of separate from those things. And then you add in this idea of masculinity for men. And I think what I hear you say is that what's really obvious, and I think it's just something I see in my coaching as well, is men who are more likely to be anxious in dating often are somewhat either disconnected from the masculinity, or the masculinity is underdeveloped in some way. That also kind of moves in line with that. I don't know if that's some experience that you've seen. Yeah,
totally. I actually just want to touch on something that you said before that, which is, and this is actually goes back to like a couple of questions ago, where these patterns really develop in, you know, these early relationships. Yes, mom, but it can also develop with dad. And these are what also contribute to our ideas of what relationships are supposed to look like, what intimacy looks like, what masculinity and femininity, what being a woman or a man, which is, I think, a lot of what, you know, women who grow up with, because most dads, especially in, you know, like the past 50 years or even before that, right? Like they've tended to be more avoidant. They've tended to be more disconnected from their emotions. They've tended to, struggle with communicating, and, you know, so that those patterns can come from that as well, right? I think that's it can be ingrained in, because I mean, it's so cliche to say it like this, but, you know, we're attracted to people who are like our mom or like our dad, you know, like those are our models for intimacy, you know, like those are the first intimate relationships we have and the deepest, you know, so they do pattern us, they imprint on us, and we learn from them what what to be attracted to, you know, what we're supposed to like, and what, you know, what we do sort of automatically like, what we are automatically drawn to. And so those patterns are also, you know, that's totally attachment theory, right? That's like attachment style stuff and abandonment wounds and all that. But yeah, those patterns can also, the messaging about who we're supposed to be in relationship and the gender norms, those can also be heavily influenced by parenting, and who our parents were. So yeah, it's called the internal working model, like just for people, for you and for listeners, it's called the internal working model. Like it's a concept in cognitive, like, attachment theory, where we develop an internal working model of how the world works, but also how relationships work from like 0 to 7. 7 is kind of 7 to 9, I would say, is they call it the formative years. And those are when you're really learning relationships, learning about yourself, your emotions, who you are, you develop this kind of set personality, and then you carry that into the rest of your life, and it becomes patterned in during those times. Like you're just learning, you know, 0 to 7, you're just taking in so much information from family, from parents, you know, how they react to certain things, how they react to you, emotions, their things around, you know, money or like everything. Like it just, we learn about the world at large from this little microcosm that we first live in, which is also our first world, right? Our first relationships and everything. So then we extrapolate that and into the rest of our lives, and we don't question them. Like they just become automatic, they become natural. But yeah, questioning that is really going to be how to open up to this authenticity, right? Like real connection, real relationships, not coming from abandonment wounds or attachment wounds, but yeah, internal working model, that's the concept of the model we create in those early, you know, phases of life. And then we sort of overlay that onto everything.
I hear that. So we just, you know, we learn the world through the world we experience as children. And because that's the world we learn, we don't question, obviously we're young kids, we don't question that model. We just think that is the model. That is how it is, right? That's how the world is. And then we bring that into our adult lives, and then we try and kind of like shove that on top of the world that we're experiencing. And I guess this is where the difficulty we start to experience is because that model isn't completely true or right or fit for these new places. We have to start to do some remodeling, to a better phrase.
Yeah. Or try to change the world, which, you know, a lot of people do as well.
Yeah.
Try to change the world or other people. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, generally we find that changing ourselves is a much easier option than changing others or changing the world.
Yeah.
And it's from my knowledge, is that our attachment styles are malleable, right? We can do some work there to bring them into a more secure place. So I'm interested in what sort of things we can kind of consciously do ourselves if we want to adjust our attachment style to be more secure. So say, for instance, someone is anxious. What can they do? What sort of habits can they take on to bring themselves into being a more secure attachment style?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think the way in for both is probably the same, but there's also this other thought that I had from something I've learned that might be helpful. But the first thing is, how it's the same is really just learning how to feel worthy of love, learning how to feel worthy as a person. This is what all self-help, I think, really, especially like spiritual stuff or therapy or whatever, like it's really aimed at learning how to feel more whole as a person, learning how to give yourself the validation and the love that you're seeking or outsourcing to other people. Learning how to, you talked about giving your power away, all that stuff. Like it's learning how to feel that sense of power and sovereignty within yourself, which really stems from early childhood experiences. It stems from not receiving love in the ways that you needed, not receiving attention in the ways that you needed, not having someone who was there and present with you in the ways that you needed. Like when you have those types of experiences, when you have missing childhood experiences, especially emotionally, but it can be physically as well, the child starts to interpret. Again, they're like in this world and they're trying to understand the world. They're trying to make sense out of it, especially if the parents aren't teaching them, right? Like in a healthy way, like, hey, this is why this happened, or, I'm sorry, I wasn't here for you for this with you for this. Like I was doing, like if they're not communicating with their child to help the child understand what's happening, especially when there's pain, especially when there's abandonment, especially when there's like those moments of intensity or confusion or chaos, then the child's going to use that information of what's happening in their environment to make sense out of it. And usually what the child will do is make it about themselves. Like, it's my fault. It's me. It's like, oh, and it's because the message that comes from the parent is usually that the child's doing something wrong, right? Especially if there is like really a lot of criticism or abuse and that type of stuff, right? Abandonment. Like it becomes, the child thinks it's about them because the parent thinks it's about the child. the parent's not owning their side. You know what I mean? They're projecting onto the child. Anyways, the message that the child internalizes with their like very young, immature, conceptual brain, right? Cognitive brain is just like, I'm bad, I'm doing something bad. It's not even I'm doing something bad. It becomes I'm bad. It's very black and white. And so I would say for people who have attachment issues or self-worth issues or issues in relationship, all that stuff, intimacy, it really does come down to like getting in touch with that wound, and being real and honest with yourself about the ways that you weren't met as a child. Yes, your parents might have been good people or like meant well, but it doesn't mean that they knew how to meet you or see you, appreciate you in the ways that you needed in your like unique human expression, which is what we all need. And so really owning that like, okay, this is what I didn't get, and this is what caused me pain. And, like all these feelings are coming up around why that happened, or not feeling enough, or maybe there's anger or shame or pain, like this is the essence of a lot of therapy, but it's processing all of that stuff and really giving yourself that love, acceptance, appreciation, attention that you needed as a kid, around all of those emotions, around all of those experiences, and holding space for yourself around that, which, to be honest, does have to first, I think, come from a relationship, whether it's therapy, coach, healer, whatever. Like, it's hard to do that with yourself unless you have somebody else like really feel compassion and empathy towards you in those places. And then you can start to learn to accept yourself and feel whole. Like you start to adopt that, you internalize those feelings, because frankly, your parents should have been those people, but they couldn't do that for you. You know, we still need those in relationship. Do you know what I mean? Like, like that's what a lot of people don't get, I think, is you know, yes, the parents, you have to accept that your parents couldn't give it to you, and just because of who they were or who they are, and like you have to accept that and come to terms with that, and then you can get that need met elsewhere. You don't like want to just put that on everybody or one person or whatever. There are places to do that in a safe way, but it can also happen in relationship. But through the love and being seen and the empathy that you get from people in those places in you, you'll also start to internalize that. Because that's like kind of a whole concept in psychology as well, but it has to come from people. Like your parents should have been the people to help you feel safe in yourself, to help you feel loved in yourself, like by showing you that love, by showing you that empathy and attunement. And then it just happens in you. Like you internalize those functions, as they say in psychology. And you can relate to yourself in that way. You can regulate your own emotions. You can parent yourself. You can talk to yourself in positive ways. Like, but you can't have that. It's hard to have that sort of like attitude or approach or feeling towards yourself if you didn't experience that from the other. So if you didn't get that, you do have to sort of find that in somewhere else to some degree. You don't want to rely on it. But, you know, you can also just start with the intention to do that with yourself, start to love yourself, validate yourself, see that you're seeking that in other people, and understand where that comes from. I guess if you want to chalk it down, it's learn how to give yourself the love, the validation, acceptance that you needed as a child, identifying the ways that you didn't get that as a child and really owning that and processing the emotions and the feelings around that. And then, maybe it's going from that to learning how to give that to yourself. So, and then your relationships will change. You'll be more open to love. Everything changes. Your life, your career path, like everything changes when you start to love yourself, right? Or start to feel worthy of love and heal those wounds. So I do that with people in a very condensed and quick way. Like you don't have to do that with years of therapy. That's a big reason why I also became a coach, was to just do things my own way. Because I found that coaching has a lot to offer that therapy doesn't, but because I understand a lot of this stuff, like I can also do this in a very accelerated way. And it brings up a lot of resistance for people, which is why therapy can take a long time. But the coaching piece is like, I really teach people this and I really help them to see it. And they do start to, you mentioned, we talked about this a bit earlier about the podcast. Like it's a framework, it's a mindset, it's a self-understanding. And sometimes it just takes people a long time to really for it to set in, for them to really understand, like, it's not about me. It was just my parents who were like this. But we have so much resistance to that initial process of owning our own feelings and recognizing our parents weren't like perfect parents. That's like the first stage of really doing your healing work. But I help men to adopt that, I guess, in a way much more quickly, so they don't have to spend years doing this work. Like you can work through it pretty quickly. But anyways, that's it's not an easy process, and I don't think a lot of people are actually equipped to do that work. I think therapy is the most equipped, because it takes so much theoretical understanding and working with the unconscious and these types of things, but there are coaches and healers and people out there who are privy to this and who are actually doing it in a deep way. So yeah, that's what I do, but that's also, I think, how people can really work on this attachment stuff is it's extreme ownership is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that kind of sprung out from what you were saying was many years ago, I did a bunch of workshops with a company, and they had this idea that they floated out probably about 25, 26. And they were like, your parents did the best job they could with what the resources they had. And I remember the person at the front announcing this, and there was like maybe 200 people in the room. And then you could ask questions, you could go up to the front and ask questions. And oh my God, this part went on for hours. People just couldn't accept that idea. That idea was like, and I was one of those people. I was just like, no way, they were bad. They should have known better. And literally accepting that idea about my parents, like both of them, my parents aren't together. So it was quite hard actually for me at the time, but accepting that my parents did the best they could of what they had opened up a whole new level of relationship with them, but also my ability to relate with other people. Because once I could look at, say, my father, for instance, and be like, okay, he was really absent and he wasn't emotionally available in any way, shape or form. And when I said to myself, well, that's the best he could do with what he knew, it opened up a humanism in him that I could see. And then it kind of opened up me going, okay, so why was he like that? And it sent me down a rabbit hole of speaking to my aunts and uncles. They were like, yeah, our dad was the same way. Like, he was worse. And then you're like, oh, so I'm like, in a way, my dad saw what he experienced and was like, that's not good enough, and tried to be better. But now for me, I look at my dad and go, that wasn't really good enough. But in fact, he did the best he could by being better than his own father. And when I saw that for myself, two things happened. One, I realized I was like, well, I don't have to be stuck. I can go a lot further. I can accelerate this evolution myself by just going further. But I also meant that I could speak to my dad in a far more compassionate way that allowed me to be like, it's not really your fault, man. Like, you didn't fuck up. You just tried your best you could do, and you lived in a different era. And our whole relationship started to change from literally doing that.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
About that? Yeah. How much of that is also like self-acceptance? Because that's an interesting like dialectic or dynamic that happens in healing work. Is like, one is like learning how to accept yourself, because there are a lot of people on one end of the spectrum who are blaming themselves for everything as opposed to their parents, and their parents are all good. And in your case, it was, fuck my parents, like, but also not taking, fuck your parents and blaming them for everything, but also not like, taking ownership of your side of everything, which I think maybe the blame or the anger, I'm not sure, but I do think, I'm curious how self-acceptance came into play with that. Because you're accepting your parents, but I imagine there's something that happened in you that opened up like a vulnerability or yeah.
Yeah, because once I accepted that they did the best they could, then it became like, what have I done to contribute to creating my life in the way that I have? Then I had to take responsibility for my own life, right? And this started to kind of happen maybe before that. I read a book when I was like 21 called Conversations with God, and it kind of opened my mind to this idea that I could change and I didn't have to be the imprint of what came before me. So when after some of that work, I was like, well, I'm completely responsible for my life. That was another thing that came out of this workshop. You are completely responsible for the outcomes that occur in your life and how your life is. And once that was embedded in, it's like, okay, so just because of my parents and the way they raised me, that doesn't mean I have to be a certain way. I'm completely responsible. And obviously that layer of self-acceptance and taking responsibility for all your actions and the implications of those is multi-layered. But when you get really deep into that kind of self-creation, self-responsibility for your life, there's no one else to blame anymore, right? So you you have to accept what's come before you, what you've done, and accept your parents the way they are. And then for me, the next stage was to be like, I'm completely responsible for what I create. And I'm always going to be responsible. And in that framework, in that way of viewing things, I am all powerful in my life, right? And if I'm all powerful in my life, then my actions have implications in my life. So let's start to be more conscious about my thoughts, my actions, you know, my feelings, and how that affects not just me, but also the people that I come into contact with.
Yeah, it almost, I don't know if this is what you're saying, but it's like your identity was wrapped up in everything in your life is your parents' fault.
Yeah.
To a certain degree. I don't know how much, but yeah, it's like they're the ones to blame. They fucked up. Like, that's why I'm like this, or my life is. But then when you let go of that, it's like, oh shit, now what? Like, now how do I live my life? It's like I have only myself to blame, or I'm fully responsible. And so yeah, that's like empowering, but also probably you know, like what can you grab onto? There's not really a ton to grab onto. So I imagine it was there was not a turbulent time, but like this growing into that new identity of self-responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's coming out of victimhood. I think that's probably a big part of it too. Like feeling a victim to life or other people. And I think it's a really important part of the journey for a lot of people. And this was the case for me, of stop getting out of that, you know, and realizing that you are responsible for your own life, and that you can actually create any life that you want, or any identity that you even want, who you want to be. And but yeah, a lot of people who are in pain, and even people who struggle with dating, like men who struggle with dating, have a hard time with women. It's this victim mentality, you know. And yeah, that can keep a lot of people stuck. So yeah, that's what I do. I when I was talking about like in an accelerated way, I get people to like work through this stuff. It's like, stop feeling like a victim, but also learning how to accept their feelings, accept what happened, taking responsibility. But yeah, but you do need to sort of feel like a victim sometimes first, and recognize that you've been hurt, but staying there is not going to be productive. Yeah.
It's just that part, as you said there, the work you do is like being responsible for your feelings, feeling your feelings, being responsible for where you want your life to go, creating a powerful vision. Like, you know, these things, even though they might feel painful to start with, especially getting more in contact with feelings, can feel incredibly painful to start with, but actually gives you a lot more bandwidth and range for experiencing the joys of life as well, you know, the low end as well as the high end, and it just makes us more whole human beings.
Yep, totally. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Yeah, that was any other questions? Because I'm like, how did we even get to this point? I'm like, oh, we started with dating, but here we are talking about like life purpose and wholeness and just being yourself, and like how to find fulfillment in the whole range of human experience. And yeah, I think that's good, because that's kind of really what I'm about. But the entryway is dating, you know. It's like dating, relationships, getting better with women, you know, more sex, that type of thing. It's like that is possible, but you don't have to do pickup. It's like, it's just learning how to become more of yourself, you know. It's like, that's why I call myself like authentic dating coach. It's like really learning how to be more of yourself, awakening these authentic energies in you, which are around, you know, masculinity, sexuality, but attached, like trauma, like relationships, like your orientation towards yourself. Like, how authentically are you expressing yourself? How confidently can you be yourself in the world? And so much of this is an internal process that then translates externally. And what I found is that when I focus it in on dating and relationships, it really helps to hone in on some of this attachment stuff, this relationship stuff, but which is also like where a lot of our wounds stem from, where a lot of our mental illness and all this, it stems so much from relationships, relational wounding. But that opens you up to intimacy, that opens you up to connection, that opens you up to dating, everything. So, and also learning how to speak up, have healthier boundaries, be yourself in the world. And, my clients, their careers just take crazy turns and stuff too. It's life purpose, it's everything. So, so it's going back to the pickup thing. And it really is like what I think the pickup people try to aspire towards, right? Like this whole idea of self-development and masculinity. But it is masculinity, it is dating, it is sex and all that stuff. But it's like the deep healing, the extreme ownership, the life purpose. So my work is very interesting. Every client's different. Every client has different needs and different places where they're at, but it all does come down to some of these core elements, especially with the attachment or therapy side, but also masculinity, dating, sex. Some of my clients have a lot of sex and they just struggle with relationships. Some of them have never, you've probably worked with some people too, or virgins or never had sex before. And it's just men who struggle with relationships. Yeah.
Such a wide range, at the heart, as you said, it often stems from the same place. And it has been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation, taking its twists and turns, and we covered a lot of other areas that touch upon the dating and the attachment and how that affects our lives. So a big thank you for today and for showing up with so much of your wisdom and knowledge and drawing for the many aspects of your being and your past that have brought you to here today. I'm sure the listeners are wondering where they can hear more about you or potentially, come to you to work with you.
Sure. Yeah, well, thanks for having me as well. I think because of who you are, drawing on these aspects of masculinity, men's work, therapy, dating, sex, like it's totally, we didn't even really get into spirituality, but like it's all in my brain and it comes through in my work, but talking about it can often be difficult, but I enjoy the conversation as well. Where people can find me right now, it's mostly just Instagram. My handle's Authentic Dating Coach. And I don't have a website. I just mostly do social media. Thinking about I have a landing page and stuff, but not like an actual website. So connect with me on there. You can find me on Facebook as well. I do have a private, free Facebook group for men where I do get more personal with them and interact with them in there. I think if you just search Authentic Dating Coach on Facebook, you'll get my Facebook page and then also the private group. So those are the two places. I have a program, one-on-one program. I don't do group right now. I do one-on-one work with men. So if you're interested, you can reach out to me.
Awesome. I'll put all those details in the show notes where people can find you and get in contact with you. Listeners, thank you for tuning in. I hope you took a lot of value. I imagine you've taken some notes and some ways in which you can bring yourself into an attachment style that can lead you to the love and relationship and even career that you really desire, and ultimately as human beings we really deserve.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
And until next week, I say ciao.
See you guys.